The Royals bullpen has been bad to start the year, but is it time to panic only 5 games in? We'll discuss it next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Podcast Network, so be sure to hit those subscribe buttons. Be sure to give us a follow on the Twitter platform and wherever you can really follow us, and leave us reviews if you really like this first podcast episode that you're watching. But you're probably wanting to know a little bit more about me. Well, I'm based here in Kansas City, work at Sports Radio 810, do some hosting, do some co-hosting, and do some producing as well. So I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when it comes to this podcast, it is strictly Royals baseball and sprinkled in from time to time around the league, Major League Baseball talk. But for the most part, we are talking 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Again, questions and comments can always be left on YouTube, and they can be left on Twitter. Well, as I'm recording this podcast, it is still up in the air as if this game is going to be played in an hour and a half between the Royals and the Orioles. The radar doesn't look good, but the Royals have posted a lineup. It was kind of right up against the gun, if you will. Usually you find out about 3 hours, 4 hours before first pitch. Day games can be a little bit different, but the longer it went without a lineup, I don't think they've got some hope that they're going to play this game. But we're going to do this podcast acting like it's not going to impact whether this game happens or not. We're going to start it off with the bullpen. I think the bullpen has been quite the talking point through the first 5 games of the season. And you can make a case that the bullpen has already stolen a few wins from them. You'll hear about bullpens stealing wins for teams. The Royals bullpen has stolen some wins from themselves. And in some of the games, I think it was almost, the pressure might have gotten to him. The situation got to him. The offense was stagnant. It wasn't really giving the bullpen much of a cushion. Not that it's an excuse, but I'm not sure I look at this bullpen and say, 1-run lead for 3 innings, go lock it down. They certainly can do it. They've gotten guys who have done it before. But I believe that this image of HDH is never going to come to fruition. Likely not again in Kansas City. I doubt it comes again in Major League Baseball. To have 3 high-end elite level relievers that can lock it down for 3-4 innings. I mean, nobody getting on base. It's pretty unlikely. I mean, I would go as far, it's a biased take, but I would go as far to say that those 3 guys in the bullpen were the best collection of 3 bullpen arms that we had seen in baseball, at least in the modern era. And it's an unhealthy relationship, I think, with Royals fans, because when you are given this level of security, you are given this high-end elite bullpen, and you win an American League pennant in 14. You win an American League pennant in 15 and win the World Series. In large part, it was due to the bullpen. Your rotation only had to go about 5 innings, and some of those guys could go far past that. But you had that luxury of you get to a 4-2 lead, game's over. Game's over if you have a 4-2 lead going in the 6th inning. And that was the confidence that everybody had in Kansas City about that bullpen. But the unhealthy part of the relationship is that the Royals haven't really had that in-between bullpen. They've had some okay bullpens, but I would say it's either been the elite level in the 2010s or it's been bottom. It's been absolutely terrible. Guys can't hold on to a 5-run lead, let alone a 1-run lead. And that's just the way it goes. And I'm not saying that some fans are looking at this and saying, well, we expect Will Smith and James MacArthur and John Schreiber to replicate HDH. I don't think that's what fans are doing, because the reality is the bullpen hasn't been good. But I also think this bullpen is definitely much better than what they've shown. I mean, even in the game yesterday, You only used John Schreiber and Will Smith had a 1-2-3 night. That was a big spot for him. And you look at what he did on Saturday, it was ugly. It just is the way it goes sometimes. But you can't knee jerk. You'll hear me say knee jerk a lot probably in April because it's such an early portion of the season and you really don't know just how good or how bad somebody is. You just hope to have a winning record or close to it by the time you leave that month, especially when you're the Royals who constantly struggle in April. But I do feel that things are going to even out with this group. I really do. And I look at this upcoming series against the White Sox. The White Sox are a terrible offensive team. They're not a good team in general. Like those are one of those series that the bullpen can get right. Because confidence is a big part of it too. If you go through 4 games and the bullpen hasn't allowed a run, you feel good about the next series. Now it's tough when you're coming off a really brutal opening series in terms of bullpen work, and then you just snap out of it and all of a sudden you're lights out for the next 3 games. It's hard to do that. But there are too many guys in this bullpen that are proven. There are too many guys with postseason success, postseason experience, guys that have pitched in much bigger spots than this and as early as last year. It's one thing when you look at a guy who's in his mid-30s, late 30s, like, oh, he's pitched in the playoffs before. Well, yeah, 10 years ago. That's a little bit of a difference. He's not as good as he was back then. Now, Will Smith's not as good as he was 3 years ago. I would say that John Schreiber is not as good as he was 2 years ago, though he's kind of emerged as this fireman guy for the Royals bullpen. But some of them should be comparable to what they were last year. I think Chris Stratton's probably going to be comparable to what he was last year, which is a decent sub-4 ERA guy in the bullpen and over 70 innings of work. I think James McArthur is going to be much better than he's shown in the first 2 outings of the season. I think you're going to have spots where Angel Serpa comes in and looks pretty good. This bullpen, to me, even though nobody's going to want to believe it right now, it's significantly better than it was last year. And it's going to take a little bit of time just for that to really come into shape. I mean, I've always thought that it's a lot easier to fix a struggling bullpen than fix a struggling rotation. I mean, it's kind of simple when you think about it. If you have 4 guys struggling in the rotation, well, then those guys are probably not working into the 5th and 6th inning. And then you're turning over the bullpen, who eventually wears down and then doesn't look too good a few weeks later on because they're gaps, they're burned out. But if the bullpen's struggling, and you think about the simple part of this, well, the rotation for the Royals right now is looking really good, at least first time through. So they're getting through the 5th, the 6th, the 7th inning. It's a rested bullpen. And a rested bullpen is always going to be a better bullpen. And, for these guys, I think that this is all going to be one of those streaky, let me walk back a little bit. This start of the season is all going to be remembered, I think, just because it's the first part of the year. But I don't think it's going to define this bullpen. Like, I see this being a very streaky bullpen. I have seen bad Royals bullpens throw 20 consecutive scoreless innings. In fact, it was to begin the year, and that was 2 years ago. Was that bullpen good in the end? Not really. It was Scott Barlow and then everybody else. Last year, the bullpen was putrid. They were on fumes because the rotation wasn't very good. But this bullpen, I think, is going to get better. It's going to even out. And a lot of the guys the Royals spend money to bring in are going to even out. They're going to get better. I think Nick Anderson's going to get better. I think that Chris Stratton's going to get better. I think Will Smith can build off last night. He's not an overpowering guy, but if he can locate, get the soft contact, play to his defense, he's going to be fine as the first half closer for this team. Then you can turn it over once you feel better with James McArthur or if somebody like John McMillan, once he's built up. Right now, it's not looking that case in Omaha, but you build him up a little bit, and he can take over that role. But I did see a good question yesterday that was posed to me of I think the Royals lack a lot of high velocity, big movement pitchers, and you want more of those. Well, the Royals had 2 of them going into spring training. They would have had Carlos Hernandez, and they would have had Angel Serpa. What's interesting now is, Hernandez is going to be coming back rather soon. I'd imagine that he will take the spot of Serpa, even though they want that other lefty, but you don't want to take Matt Sauer out of there because you'd send him back to the New York Yankees. I don't think they're going to knee-jerk and DFA one of the struggling arms. To me, it really does feel like when Carlos Hernandez comes back, there's a high-velocity guy you have. John McMillan's going to take a little bit longer, but at that point, you are going to have to make that tough decision. You may have to DFA one of your struggling relievers, or if Matt Sauer's not doing good, you'd have to send him back to New York. To me, though, I'm just not concerned right now. And they may not be good if they play today. Again, as I'm recording this, we could have already gotten the breaking news. The game's not happening, but if it's today, it's tomorrow, and the bullpen struggles, I'm not overly concerned about it because I have faith that proven guys usually even out more than the unknown. The Royals had a lot of unknown guys last year, and that constantly worked against them. This year, having guys that have that experience, it's going to work in their favor. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I'm going to tell you about a few guys I am at least a little bit concerned about. I can't be too optimistic. There has to be some guys that I go, there could be a bit of a problem there moving forward and long term. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to one of the sponsors today in PrizePicks. Spring training is over and baseball season is officially underway. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your PrizePick entries. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, take your pick of more or less and add them to your PrizePicks entry today. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. So we got baseball in full swing now. We've got college hoops into the Final Four. NBA is inching closer to the playoffs. But the playoffs begin at PrizePicks April 20th in the play-in rounds, April 16th, 17th, and 19th. So what you need to do, go and download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, to close out the show yesterday, we talked about not having much of a reason to complain. That 2-3 and facing two reigning division champs from 2023 is a record you take and you say thank you with it. Maybe they can get to 3-3 today, assuming they play. I don't know yet, at least as I'm recording. There hasn't been any official announcement. The weather doesn't look that good, though, in Baltimore. But I also think it's all right to express some level of concern, not complain, concern with either guys in the bullpen, guys in the lineup. And I think I am going to, zero in on the lineup here. And the funny thing about the lineup, and actually the funny thing about every stat in baseball this early on, you look at Will Smith, who had a 30-plus something ERA because he gave up 4 runs in the 9th on Saturday. He has a 1-2-3 inning. That number significantly drops. That's just the way it goes. I mean, Kyle Freeland had another bad start against the Cubs at Wrigley Field. He gave up, I think it was 4 or 5 runs in the first 2 innings, but he gave up like 10 or 11 in his start against Arizona last time out. His ERA dropped. Like, it's just this early on, it's going to fluctuate a little bit. And for the lineup, it's the exact same thing. Salvador Perez was 0 for 7, 0 for 8 to begin the year, and then it's been on the tear the last 3 games. He's homered in 2 of the 3 games. He's hitting the ball hard, and now his average looks fine. It can take 1 or 2 games, or 1 or 2 really good games, and the numbers look a lot better. But I also can only go off these numbers, right? Until that player has a really good game or a really good outing, I have to at least express some level of concern. And I don't think it's going to be too much of a shock of the 2 or 3 guys I bring up here. Number 1, it's Hunter Renfroe. Hunter Renfroe had a slight setback in spring training, not saying it was everything, but he had a slower start to the spring. And maybe, just maybe, that can be attributed to this lack of success. But, this is a guy that needed a bounce back year. This is a guy that has a player option for next year. And, the way it's looking right now, I'm just not sold that it's trending in a direction where he's on this team in the second half. It's early, but 0 for 14, 0 for 15 is not going to do you any favors when you're looking for a bounce back year. Some Royals players had the immediate pressure of you got to perform well in April. MJ Melendez had it. Kyle Isbell had it. Both those guys played pretty well so far. At least somewhat okay. Above average, I think I would go with. Now, those were two guys that had pretty big expectation. And there's the others that you're just naturally going to give them time. Garcia, Bobby Wood Jr., Benny Pasquantino. But Renfroe, I would just say the entire outfield for the Royals, they didn't have the luxury of starting really, really slow. And Hunter Renfroe, especially because he didn't cash in with bases loaded and 1 out on Monday night's loss, that really had fans turning against him. Now, this is a guy who I think even when he struggles, he has a down year, he runs into 20 home runs. And I know the Royals value that, especially with the way they've been lifting the ball. And to be fair, if they weren't playing at Camden Yards yesterday, and it shoulda, woulda, coulda, but he homered. Like, he had a ball 380 feet to left field, and it was caught for an out. Like, I thought it was gone. I had even tweeted before the game that it just felt like his first hit is going to be a mammoth home run. And it would have been if they weren't at Camden Yards. But also, Adley Rutschman, I think it was, had a home run in 29 of 30 parks in the ninth inning off Will Smith. But the only one it wouldn't leave the yard was Camden Yards. But Hunter Renfroe has to be one of those guys. I mean, I go 1 through 9 in this lineup, and I look at Renfroe needing the bounce back year. And no, he's had some good at-bats, hit the ball really hard and has been robbed. He was robbed twice on opening day. He was robbed the other day. But there's nothing that he's doing outside of that I go, well, he's really on the brink of a breakout. I did hear this from the broadcast, though, yesterday, which gives me hope that maybe this is just who he is. Ryan Lefebvre was very smart to bring this up, that April's always been Hunter Renfroe's worst month. Like, he's just a slow start. But then as the season progresses, the weather gets warmer, the bat comes around. Now, let me be very clear about this. And if you're one of those fans that says, I want Renfroe out of here, he's terrible. Like I said, it takes 1 or 2 great games, and you probably feel better about it. And he's going to have a great opportunity against dismal pitching in the Chicago White Sox this coming weekend. A great chance for him to just put together a series of 6 for 15. Like, that's what you would hope for. Maybe even better than that. But Hunter Renfroe's not going to be released. He's not going to be DFA'd because of four, might add. He hasn't even played in one of them. 4 bad games. I'm concerned because I thought in a bounce back year, I mean, you're looking at a guy that could run into 25 or 30 home runs. I mean, you go back 2 years, that Hunter Renfroe makes this lineup a lot more dangerous. So that's what I'm more so concerned with, not of him being just a league average player. I think he will be. I don't think he's going to be a black hole in that lineup. I think there are things to like about Hunter Renfroe's game, but it's a little bit of a concern to me. And I know people are pounding the table for Nick Pratto. They are not abandoning a guy they signed in the offseason to a 1-year deal with a player option 4 games in. We saw how long they stuck with Hunter Dozier. We saw how long they stuck with numerous guys, Carlos Santana. Now, Renfroe's going to get his shot. But if it trends even worse than this and you're getting closer to the first half, then they can make that decision. But right now, I don't think it's time to, push him out or anything like that. It takes 1 or 2 good games. Now, I know it sounds like I'm not being too concerned. I'm more so concerned for what I thought he could become. That's where I'll leave it. The other guy I'm a little bit concerned with is Nelson Velasquez. And I hate to say that, but he struck out a lot in this Baltimore series. Now, he does have a double in this series. He has already homered this year. The average doesn't look terrible. The OPS doesn't look terrible. And this kind of is who Nelson Velasquez is. He's worked a couple 3-ball counts. He's worked a couple full counts. And that is a positive when looking at a guy like Nelson Velasquez. But to me, he can't be an everyday player if he's striking out 30, 35% of the time. If you're going to do that, you need to run into 25 or 30 home runs, which he's got the capability of. But I don't think that's who Nelson Velasquez wants to be. I think he wants to be a well-rounded hitter. And the strikeouts right now are just a little bit concerning. And he's missing on pitches that are well located, but they're the same pitches over and over again. I mean, it's the off speed, it's the breaking pitch, it's the slider, it's the swerve, it's the sweeper. I said the swerve. The slurve is what I should say. The sweeper. The changeup. He's whiffing on all of them. He's a great fastball hitter, but the book's out on him now. He's got to be able to adjust, and I'm sure he will. He's faced good pitching in Baltimore. Like with Renfroe, he's going to have a good opportunity against a bad pitching staff of the White Sox to do some damage there. But those are really only the two guys in lineup that I feel a little bit concerned about right now. But hopefully they can prove me wrong moving forward into the next homestand. Well, we're going to move on to our final segment, of today's episode. And it's going to be about the stadium vote from last night. It broke as I was doing that episode on Alec Marsh. It was a vote no. I don't really like to get into the nitty-gritty details of all of it, but I'll just give you my thoughts on it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Forgot to do this before the break, but want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. You can make that switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we also want to give a shout-out to the other sponsor today in Gametime. Now, Gametime is where I go to buy all of my tickets. I'm actually going to the game on Friday, coming up in a few days, and I'm going to be buying my tickets over at Gametime. They've got great bundle deals. They tell you the hottest deals, the cheapest ticket deals, and they get those tickets sent right over to you. And I used other apps before. I went through team websites before to buy tickets. I've never had an easier time than I do when using Gametime. So here's what you need to do if you're thinking about buying tickets for the upcoming homestand. You can download the app today and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. For a limited time, all users can get $20 off of any purchase of $150 or more in the Gametime app with code FIRSTPITCH. Those terms apply. So again, that's code FIRSTPITCH, FIRSTPITCH, for $20 off from March 25th to April 14th. So we're getting close to that, about 11 days away. So March 25th to April 14th, it'll end here in just under 2 weeks. So download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, much to what I think people thought is yesterday was a little bit of a shock. Not the game itself, but I believe a lot of people last night thought the vote was going to pass in favor of the downtown stadium, for Kauffman Stadium to not relocate. They're going to demolish Kauffman Stadium and build new down by the T-Mobile Center. And Arrowhead Stadium was going to go through some renovations. As I've stated multiple times on the podcast before, I hate talking about it. It just always felt like a mess. There was too much going on. There was so much of a divide. And I had people in the comments saying they either were really in favor of it or they really were against it. So I really do not enjoy talking about something when it's such a hard divide. Because either way, you're going to get a lot of criticism. And as a podcaster, it's not that you shy away from criticism, but it's not always fun to post an episode when you feel like 50% of who's listening is going to be pounding down your door and screaming in your face. That's not something that you want to ever have to deal with. But what I can tell you is this. It goes back to what I just said. It was a mess, right? Everything about this process, about this proposal felt messy to me. And what I had kind of gathered from this public, from people I had talked to, and just from my own research, I think both sides, both parties, the Chiefs, the Royals, just thought this was going to pass. Like it just kind of sat back and said, oh, yeah, this is what everybody wants. It's going to pass. Downtown Stadium, going to bring in a lot of revenue. And I think that would be the case. But there was a large majority, and more than majority, more than half, that voted no. And they were very vocal about it. There were protests. There were rallies, for lack of a better term. I don't want to go as far to say that, it was swarming downtown. But there were very vocal people that at once were thought to be the minority was the overwhelming majority saying no to the downtown stadium. And I know that this is going to cause more friction and it's going to cause more tension. But the most important thing now is to go back to the drawing board and come up with a much more thought out and cleaner proposal, and maybe even more feedback from those that said no. Now, there's also the chance that those that voted no are always going to vote no. No, it's not like the next time a vote happens, you've got 100% yes and nobody voted no. It's just not the case. I know that the fear is now, well, oh, geez, are the Royals and Chiefs, are they going to move? Are they going to move out of state? I'm not there yet. I don't believe it's going to be that. What we also know is Kauffman Stadium is not being saved by this. Right? Kauffman Stadium, I do not believe, is going to host a Royals game in 2031, because I think the lease is up in 2030. So Kauffman Stadium, because the vote no, is not being saved. That might be one of the misconceptions with those that didn't go vote or maybe didn't really care to do much research. That's not a knock or anything. I hated doing the research. I hated trying to keep up with this because it was so confusing. It was so messy. It was just jumbled together. And it was like, well, like our proposal. And the other side was saying, well, you hate the proposal. And it was, well, people are going to vote yes. And then they voted no. And now here we are. But Kauffman Stadium was never getting saved by this. It's not like the vote no is going to keep the Royals Kauffman Stadium for years to come. At least I don't believe it to be the case. If the Royals are going to move downtown, they either need to pick the perfect location that is going to get the majority votes yes, maybe not uproot a lot of those businesses downtown. I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but clearly the proposal they had in place was not good enough. They did not get enough yes votes. They got far more no votes on that. But I'm also not sure it was because of just the stadiums itself. I think it was the way they went about it. I think it was the way that it just was so messy. It was trying to not rush through things, but the Royals and Chiefs had a long time to come up with a great proposal, get great feedback, and move forward with it. And maybe in the end, it was just too messy. And look, I would love for a world where you have like 80% yes and maybe just 20% no, just because that's the way it works. Like, you want to run away. You want, if this stadium is to be moved, or I keep saying moved, demolished and rebuilt, you want the overwhelming majority of the population here to say, yes, I love it. It just doesn't feel like that right now. And I know there's some people, I know a few people that wanted to move to the Kansas side. I actually worked out at the Legends. Have you ever been up to the KCK side? I worked in independent league ball for the Kansas City Monarchs. It's a great area over there. I don't see that happening. I don't see Arrowhead or Kauffman being moved to the Kansas side. But it's got to get a lot cleaner. That's what I probably will leave it at here. It's got to get a lot cleaner. From not just the Royals side here, but also the Chiefs side. I know we're a Royals podcast, but I don't think there was much of a push from the Chiefs. The renovations didn't look that impressive to me. It's like, that doesn't look any different than what Arrowhead Stadium looks like right now. So it got turned off more than we thought it would. At least what I thought. I did not think that it was going to be a runaway with the no votes, but that's the answer we got. Kansas City voted no yesterday on question 1 for the downtown stadium, the renovations at Arrowhead. We'll see where they go from here, but I'll tell you this, it's got to get a lot cleaner. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me that follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We'll give one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Well, tomorrow we're going to break down a little bit of the upcoming homestand. I know I teased that yesterday, but thought we'll see what happens in today's game, if it actually happens at all, against the Orioles, and we'll preview 2 opponents in the Chicago White Sox and the Houston Astros. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.